Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Nous sommes ravis de vous souhaiter la bienvenue ici en ligne. My name is John Wickham. I'm the Communications Officer of the Quebec Writers Federation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Lunch and Learn on writing medicine authentically in speculative fiction. If you don't write speculative fiction, rest assured, folks, we're not going to kick you out. All are welcome, and in fact, I'm sure that whatever genre you're writing in, you'll find something of value in today's talk. Before I introduce our speaker for today, as with all QWF events, first we give thanks and we remember. We give thanks for the land we live on and the waters that surround us, and we remember that Jojage, or Montreal, the land upon which QWF has made its home, has been a gathering place for millennia, and still remains the unceded territory of the Ganya Gahaga and other First Nations. We recognize the stories and ongoing oral practices of the Indigenous peoples of these lands, which inform our work as writers and literary artists. We remember that we, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, settlers, immigrants, and descendants of people brought here against their will, live in this country together. We must never forget our experiences and roles and those of our ancestors in colonization and subsequent injustices, and must strive to live alongside one another in peace and mutual respect, and as allies to steward the lands and waters that sustain us. We must walk gently and respectfully on these lands and commit to investing QWF resources and efforts towards this goal of friendship, esteem, and the pursuit of justice and equality. Okay, now for a bit of housekeeping. Please keep your microphones muted unless you have been given the floor to speak. If you have questions, hold on to them until the Q&A portion near the end of the session. At that time, you can unmute yourself and ask your question aloud. Or you can also write your questions at any time in the chat, and we'll get to those ones in the order we receive them during the Q&A. Lastly, this session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel at a later date. And with that out of the way, let's meet our speaker for today, Kyrie Wang. Kyrie Wang is a medical mystery detective, fancy words for pathologist MD by day, and a dreamweaver of historical fantasy by night. Pencil and paper makes her laugh and cry, and every book she writes is like living another life. She loves writing stories where people discover their true selves, goodness wins, and the forgotten and the voiceless become heroes. When she isn't peering through a microscope or building hamster toys with her daughter, Kyrie is at her keyboard chasing the next adventure. Kyrie, thanks so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to be here to talk about two of my favorite things, which is writing and medicine. So as John has mentioned, I am a pathologist from Quebec. I'm also the author of the Enemy's Keeper series, which is a young adult magic-free historical fantasy with romance. It's set in an alternative medieval world where the Vikings, Celts, and Norman Knights clash over gunpowder, and this alternative history aspect is the fantasy element. My female main character is a healer, and through her, I'm able to mix in medical intrigue into my stories. So the way we'll approach this talk is similar to the way I would approach a resection specimen from the OR. First, I would look at the specimen grossly, measure it, and look for tumors, and then again, look at the specimen under the microscope to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. Similarly, we're going to approach the subject of writing medicine in our stories by looking at the macro level first, which is medicine as part of world building, and then we'll dive down and look at it, the micro aspect, which is the story scenes and weaving in authentic character reactions. We'll end the talk with some pitfalls and common medical mistakes that I see in my reading, and a list of resources. I'm just going to minimize the windows on the side. There we go. What we won't talk about is forensics. In Canada, forensics is an additional year of training, which I don't have, and also is just beyond the scope of this talk. So why should we include medicine in our story? Certainly, you don't have to write medicine to write a compelling story. But the reason I do it is because it enhances the reader's connection with your character. In a way, it's almost like a dirty trick. So, for example, if you think of the villain in All the Light We Cannot See, the villain Reinhold, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, he is driven by the desire for immortality and the Sea of Flames diamond. And that is because he also has cancer. And with this simple backstory of serious illness, this villain now has a compelling motivation and is no longer seen as one-dimensional or just doing evil for evil's sake. And also in the real world, everyone gets sick. So if you include some elements of health and medicine in your story, it will enhance the reader's connection with your character. Illness and injury also come with inherent tension. You want to know if the character's going to get better or worse. So that keeps readers turning the pages. And finally, medicine adds a dimension to your world building and makes the world feel fleshed out and lived in. So talking about the macro aspect of medicine as part of our world building. As speculative fiction authors, we make stuff up, but the stuff needs to have internal logic. So for example, if you have blue mushrooms on page 5 that can reconstitute limbs, by page 298, the magic mushrooms still have to be blue and have the same properties. And so magic, invented herbs, and non-realistic treatments are fine if they're internally consistent. And I would also add if they're well foreshadowed beforehand. So you're not popping suddenly a technology that exists, partway through your book and has never been spoken of before. And whether you write sci-fi or historical fantasy, keep in mind that readers expect some alignment with real-world practices. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. The key takeaway here is that even in made-up worlds, sustainable logic within your story is what keeps readers immersed. So speaking of extensions of the real world, here is Dolly the sheep, who was a mammal clone from an adult cell back in 1997. Many North American readers, or I would say probably most people in the world now, are aware of cloning as a technology. And so in, say, a dystopian novel, you can take this baseline understanding further and say, well, in my society, humans are cloned and sold as a commodity, for example. For an example from fantasy, you can say, I found magical wood to make prosthetics out of, and now I have a wooden arm that can move with the sun or with heartbeats, for example. And I would add also that you should tailor the exposition of your medical world based on your intended audience. So where I'm from, I was born in China. The audience there would be quite familiar with Chinese traditional medicine, including cupping, gua sha, and qi, for example. And a story geared towards that audience would not have to spend so much exposition explaining all this, versus, I would say, North American audience, where I can't expect this to be a common understanding in North American culture. So gear your exposition towards the audience you're writing for. Medicine also never exists in a silo. This is a cartwheel I like to draw when I do my world building, with one element of society, such as medicine and the center, the hub, and then all the other aspects of society connected to it as spokes. The medicine cartwheel has medicine in the middle, and that would impact the personnel that exists in this world, that administers the medicine, the infrastructure where medicine is given, the herbs and drugs that constitute the medication, and in fantasy worlds, magic, religion, and technology and science will all be impacted and influenced by medicine. I would also say that nice thing about this cartwheel idea is that you can take another element such as religion, put that in the center of your hub, and then draw, these spokes around it, and then do further world building until you have this pretty complex web. So when it comes to medical advances and technology, the interplay here, what to be aware of is really that your world's technology and culture supports its medical advances and cures. So say that in your story, the characters are talking about germs, they're avoiding certain things because they don't want to get infected, or they're popping antibiotics left and right. But also in this world, there's no electricity. Like me as a reader, will find that very strange because electricity is needed to power this thing called an awesome thing called a microscope. And without it, where would the understanding for viruses and bacteria even come from? And who would be doing the susceptibility tests for the antibiotics? So on. And are there laboratories for synthetic drugs? Then you have to think about, transportation of these drugs. Are there planes or trains in the society to allow for that to happen? And the other thing to keep in mind is, what are the costs of advanced medical techniques in your world? Especially in more futuristic settings, you can easily get carried away with, I have a drug for this problem and a cure for that problem. And suddenly you have no more illness because you essentially cure everything, everybody lives forever. So then, it loses tension in your story. So keep in mind the costs of advanced medical techniques, whether that is resource depletion, pollution, or personnel burnout as examples. Now, switching gears to religion, intersection of religion and medicine. In your world, think about whether illnesses are seen as curses, divine punishment, some kind of human imbalance, or is an infection, and they'll have to understand bacteria and viruses for that. Do people pray or sacrifice, or do they seek physicians first when someone falls ill? Keep in mind that religious approval or condemnation can legitimize or suppress certain cures, even if they exist in society. Like, are they being sold on the black market because the religious authorities disapprove of this method, for example? The conflict between faith and science can drive rich plot tension. And I would say this is some of my favorite type of conflict in a story. The first author I spoke to when I thought about kind of this conflict between science and the faith is my friend Heidi Scary, who is the author of the sci-fi series Star Rider. And in books 6 and 7, she has two characters who are completely at odds with each other. So Everett is the main male character, and Marissa, seen here, is the female main character. She wants to be a priestess of a religion called Aniism, which is a faith that deems intimacy impure. She wields psychic reishi powers released from special crystals. It can communicate telepathically. And she can also use reishi power to heal. But importantly, it exhausts her. Meanwhile, the main male character, Everett, believes in God. He chants in who a love song to God to center himself. He practices a form of medicine akin to North American traditions, condemns telepathy and mind control, and definitely desires intimacy. And in these books 6 and 7, the two somehow fall in love and stay in love. I just wanted to read a short excerpt from Hair de Japar. This is book 7 to showcase the tension between faith and what I would say is more like science-based medicine in her world. The context here is that Everett's wife, Marissa, has just given birth to their son. Everett is holding his baby when his sister Fawn walks in. Everett drew a shaking breath. Marissa could die. What? All at once, her heart rate plummeted and she lost consciousness. His throat constricted and he could barely continue. They wouldn't let me stay with her. Fawn placed her hand on his arm. Oh, Everett, I'm so sorry, but I'm sure she'll be all right. She's young and strong. Dr. Tenzing doesn't know what's wrong with her, and Dr. Tenzing is a North American type doctor. Her mother's a priestess and a healer. She'll know what to do. I don't want that woman anywhere near Marissa and our baby. If Marissa hadn't used her cursed reishi power during her pregnancy, her life wouldn't be at risk. Fawn frowned. That wasn't Halle Farr's fault. Yes, it was. She's the one who gave Marissa to the monastery as a small child to hone her reishi power. There's danger in using psychic forces, but Aniism is still a valid religious teaching. There are many paths to God. You wouldn't say that if you visited the Anian monastery. They're into power and control, instead of love and service, as Master Nishio teaches. This is the opening of book 7 in the series, and what I love about it is that it quickly reminds the reader of who is who, like as a recap. It immediately introduces what is at stake, which is a baby's life, and the dialogue showcases tension between the people and their beliefs. And there's rich emotional tension in the part of Everett. Now we move on to magic and medicine as part of world building. So once again, you have to think about what's the limits between the magical and the non-magical healing in your world. Is healing magic restricted to a certain race or class? And is it limited to wielders of a certain object? Can everyone else still practice non-magical healing? And if that's the case, then what makes your healing magic so special? And there also must be consequences to healing magic. For example, exhausting the person who does it. As for the people involved in medicine, are they doctors and nurses like we understand them here in North America? Or are they monks, shamans, druids, or temple healers? And is there a mainstream medicine and then an alternative medicine in your world? So I have a sort of funny story about this alternative medicine. My mom is a huge believer in traditional Chinese medicine, and like for my entire life, that's pretty okay with me. But to this day, when I go back to visit her in the summer, she's in the US, she would like give me looks and disapproval because I'm drinking ice water. When I was growing up, like this was just a constant annoyance. But when I was 17, I went back to China for the first time after having left when I was 5. And I realized that nowhere can you get ice because in the restaurants, everybody's just drinking lukewarm water or even like broth boiled from like just a little bit of rice to give it flavor. But everybody's drinking warm. And my aunts are carrying around thermoses of tea at like 36 degrees Celsius. So I ended up having to carry around my own ice in a thermos for my summer trip because I could like not survive. And now I understand that my mom is not just, odd in her own sense, but this is really part of traditional Chinese medicine. So that was a lot of theory about how to outline your world. But how do I practically find inspiration for world building? So there are some tips I have for you to get started. Ask yourself what happens if someone is injured or sick, if someone is born or dies, because then your protagonist, who may be otherwise having an unremarkable day, his world is totally upended, especially if someone dies. Now, are there burial practices surrounding the death? Are there somebody special to take care of the body? So who is involved? And if there is a treatment for this person, what would be given? What medication? Is there a special herb? And where is the patient taken? So answering these 3 questions will likely help you add occupations, settings, fauna and flora, and more to your story world. You can also do some research online, something I like to do actually, random Googling, just studying medical systems from all around the world. And the advantage to that is they are evolved over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and they are largely coherent within themselves, right? And then you can take the system that's been tested through time and adapt certain elements for your own world. I told my friend Linda Lang, who's also an author, that I was doing this talk, and she was like, you must include a slide of traditional Chinese medicine. So there you go, Linda. I'm fulfilling my promise. Does anybody know what is going on here in the lower right-hand corner? Are people all muted though, John? Or are you, are you muted as well?
I just unmuted myself.
Okay,
I see people in the chat are saying cupping.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes, I need to get my own video back into this. How do I see my own screen now?
We're
Screen
hoping to be
sharing.
acupuncturists and writers. I completely get it.
Oh, yeah, great. I did having some trouble going back to my screen. Just a moment. Huh.
In the
Okay.
meantime,
Oh, there we go.
Pearl, I
Okay,
see
I
you
got it.
have your hand raised. Did you have a comment as well?
Just as a family doctor and having done pathology for a year, it's very interesting, the intersection between thinking about pathology and thinking about building a constructing and deconstructing, as it were, a world.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. So I'm gonna back to this talk. You guys are absolutely right. So this is cupping, and what it involves is taking these glass jars, creating a vacuum by putting heat inside and drawing it out quickly, and then pressing it on the patient's affected area. It's commonly thought to treat arthritis pains. And my mom does this. When I was 10 years old, I went downstairs, and in the living room, she had these jars stuck to her knees. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen as a 10-year-old. But yeah, she swears by this. It really helps her knees. And what is depicted here is acupuncture. And here is traditional Chinese medicine that you can still find in major Chinatowns all across the world.
And in many modern acupuncture clinic too.
Yes.
Even in hospitals. So I'm in Seattle, so it's still happening here.
Very cool. Now we move on to the micro element of writing medicine authentically. This section is going to be a little bit longer. First, before you write medicine to your scenes, ensure that the medicine fits naturally into their plot. So ask yourself, why should I include a medical situation in the scene? Does medicine propel my character's internal arc and propel also the external plot? And what happens if I do not write this scene? The answer should be the story loses a critical step in character arc progression and or the plot is somehow messed up. Because otherwise, if you can just take out the scene completely, maybe you can think about sending that as deleted scene to your newsletter subscribers. But I would recommend that the scene not be included in your final version. In talking about authentic character experiences and reactions, it is definitely possible to write about illnesses you've never experienced. I believe that despite the vast range of human experiences we can have, the emotions that result from the experiences are largely universal. So that includes sorrow, guilt, despair, and so on. And anytime you've written emotions at all in a character, whether it's good or bad, you have already drawn from your own experiences without maybe even thinking about it. And as a skill, of course, we have to hone with time as writers. And to further develop this, I recommend you can try this to write down the next time you are ill, how you feel physically and mentally. Like, don't think about nice prose, just vent on a piece of paper. And so next time you want to write a character who's very downtrodden, you can just take out that slip of paper and kind of like get an idea of what your mental state was at the time to better write that character. I also recommend that you interview those who have been through the experience, the illness that you're trying to depict, whether that be dialysis patients, diabetic patients, amputees, patients and healthcare workers can be a very valuable source while you're doing your story research. Now moving on to disability representation. I don't have experience with this because I don't have such characters in my books, but I spoke to my fellow fantasy author, Mary Meekham, who is the author of numerous best-selling romantasy titles. She's also a disability advocate with a special interest in individuals with severe intellectual disability and rare diseases. Mary also has 3 children, 2 of whom have rare diseases and severe intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I'm very grateful to Mary's advice, which she sent to me via multiple voice messages on Instagram. So she has do's and do nots. And the do's are, Mary suggests that you find at least 3 sensitivity readers. So these are readers who have the disability you're writing about for advice on accurate and respectful representation. The reason for at least 3 is because people experience the same situation differently. So one person can find a certain experience empowering, while another may find the exact same experience offensive. Multiple perspectives will help you see what truly represents the majority of that community. Now, as we're finding sensitivity readers, where are you going to get them? She recommends going to Facebook groups. You can contact the admin and say like, hey, is it okay if I'm an author? I would love to hire a few sensitivity readers to make sure I'm portraying this disability accurately and respectfully. And then you can hopefully make a post and offer compensation if you can. And we can ask the sensitivity readers, what do people often say to you? How does it make you feel? And what do you wish people understood? And she also says, as a second do, write characters with disability as whole, complex humans and not just defined by disabilities. So give them hopes and dreams and fears and flaws and strengths, just like any other character in your book. The list of do nots is a bit longer, and it's definitely lightning for me. So she says, do not assume that people with disability are unhappy. What struck me was she said that many deaf people have strong deaf pride. They don't see deafness as something to fix, and they're happy and confident in their identity. So if you write a deaf character who hates being deaf, just keep in mind that it won't resonate with most of the deaf community. And also do not have another character do everything for the character with the disability. Because people, they take pride in their independence. An author may mistakenly think, though, that one character doing everything for this other character is seen as romantic. For example, a female main character who has some sort of disability and the male main character just does everything for her. But, maybe the author is trying to come across as he's very romantic, but to the disability community, that just seems like infantilizing. And number 3, do not write a story where people with disabilities are the villains. She said that's flat out ableism. We'll talk about ableism in the next slide. And number 4, do not cure the disability as part of the happy ending. This is her biggest pet peeve. Essentially, the message given here is that you can't have a happily ever after unless you're able-bodied. And until your disability is gone, you can't have a fulfilling life. And so it comes across as disability means you're having a second-class life. Even though the author does not intend it that way, that's how it comes across. So what is ableism? Ableism describes any prejudice, bias, and discrimination directed towards people living with disabilities, according to Healthline.com. And understanding what ableism is and the subtle ways it can manifest in your writing will help you immensely. For as an example, your friend's teenage son has cystic fibrosis and uses a breathing tube. One day you say to your friend while he's in the room, "That's so incredible he goes to school. You must be so proud of him." Now, know this interaction is meant to be positive, but why it comes across as ableism is because even though you're talking about your friend's son, you are completely ignoring him in the room. Plus, praising someone with a disability for doing something non-disabled people do daily is also ableist. Subtle, but it's ableist. And what to say instead is, it's fine to praise an achievement, something you compliment anyone for. Maybe you can say, "Your mom told me you had a painting in the district art contest, and that's pretty impressive." So Mary has disability representation in many of her books, and you'll have the presentation after this talk, and you can look up her work. As for mental health in speculative fiction, I turned to my friend Linda Ling, who is also an Asian physician. She's a psychiatrist, actually, and she writes under the pen name Linda Ling. And in her Mid-Flight Vampire's Tale, The Origin Chronicles Book 1, certain humans have evolved to detect vampires nearby. But what I thought was so clever is that the rest of society doesn't understand this or understand that vampires are still amongst them. So a particular character named Sarah is diagnosed with panic attacks because she is detecting vampires. So her mental health rep advice is to talk to real people and not just read Reddit forums or forums of any kind, because until you can actually see in someone's body language, the tone of voice they're using, the emotions, it's hard to get a feel of the whole package, so to speak, to write a character authentically. And if you can't talk to real people, interview them, reflect on your own moments of loss, fear, or disappointment. She said that many people have had dysfunctional relationships with parents, and that could be a source of drawing emotions from yourself, the memories of that. And very importantly, she said, what did you include and reflect on? What did you do to feel better? Show the healing, not just the hurt, and don't forget to portray recovery, resilience, and growth. So this is a scene that I thought was really well written from her book, A Mid-Flight Vampire's Tale. This is Sarah, the human I told you about who could detect vampires, and Tony is a vampire. So here we go. Tony's face fell. Oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should not have said that. Not after what you told me about your brother. He brushed her hand in a gesture of sympathy. A flash of red appeared before her mind's eye. Sarah jolted, feeling breathless. All traces of that pleasant alcohol-induced buzz disappeared like a receding tide. She gasped as her heartbeat climbed and her vision grew red and darkened. She gripped the table's edge. Oh no, not now. What's happening to you? He asked in alarm. The panic attack. He frowned. Was that what happened the other day? Nearly. She squeezed her eyes shut. Shoot. Now I see red. Red? That doesn't sound normal. Stop talking. I need my meds. Great. Now I can't move. She wanted to grab her bag. A few tablets were in her purse, but she was too frozen in fear. He stared at his fingers, which had brushed her hand just before the attack came on. You see red? He asked, looking more thoughtful than concerned. Darn it, do something. My bag, she rasped. Meds. Hold on, let me try something. He was right beside her now. She felt his leg and hip press up against her, then his arm behind her waist. A hand caught the side of her face while his lips nuzzled the angle of her jaw. She squeaked, stunned. Still panicking, the red in her vision grew. She was too frightened to be embarrassed by this strange and sunlike public display of affection. Calming you down, he murmured, hot breath sending a thrill through her as he moved down her neck. Feel better? So all the symptoms of panic attack are woven into this scene. I thought was really well written. So speaking of weaving medicine into the scenes, we're going to put it together. And this is how you approach doing exactly that. So before you start writing your scene, do your research. So then you can write with confidence, because when you're writing the scene, you're worried about like the pacing, the dialogue, and like the scenery. It's not the time to pause and be like, wait, what was the symptoms again 15 minutes after getting shot? So just do your research ahead of time and you'll save yourself a lot of headache later. And then weave in character emotions. We talked about that earlier. Also, I recommend strongly write knowing what the remedy should be and what you want the character's fate to be. Is he live or does he die? Now, I didn't do that for one of my Sarah characters. People who read my work can probably identify who it is, but he was poisoned since the very beginning of Healer's Blade, my debut novel. And at the time, I was like, hey, this is such a cool idea. I'm going to make him poison. But then, 10 chapters later, he's still poisoned and I have not dealt with this at all. Like, I didn't decide if he's going to live or die. And so I did not weave into my story, does his symptoms progress or does somebody give him antidote so that his symptoms are getting better? Let's go back and rewrite 10 chapters so that I can weave in all the symptoms and the antidote and so on. So just don't do what I did and craft the sort of fate of your character before you write your scenes. The other reason to do this is that then you can direct your dialogue and direct all of your narrative around whether this character lives or dies. And that would influence all your other characters and, of course, the story as a whole. And finally, keep progressing the internal character arc and external action as you write the medicine into your scene. I have an excerpt from my own story coming up. This is my debut novel, Healer's Blade. So the shortened synopsis of this one is that 18-year-old Alwyn is a failed healer's apprentice. She's haunted by her medical mistakes and keeps to herself during a revolt against William the Conqueror. But when she unwittingly becomes the only civilian to lure rebels smuggling gunpowder to England, she must rise to save her kingdom. Can she resist the magnetic charms of the rebel leader she's vowed to defeat? And that's Toby. This is the excerpt towards the last third, actually, of my debut. And the reason I chose it is because it has all the elements of character arc and the plot progression in a relatively short passage. So the context here is that Alwyn is on board a cargo ship with rebels, including Zarwin, who is a 15-year-old boy, and Toby, the main male character, and they have just escaped an assault on their ship. Alwyn has a grudge against Zarwin for throwing away a recorder that she loves. Zarwin slammed back against the railing. Torn from her thoughts, Alwyn stared as he grabbed his head with both hands and bared his head in misery. Make it stop! Make what stop? My head's spinning, it won't stop! You all right, Zell? Someone hollered from behind the row of oarsmen. He wasn't. Alwyn struggled to rise above her inner storm when Zarwin turned to her in a panic. What's wrong with me? Blood trailed from his nose. He looked alert, so why was he dizzy? Alwyn turned to him and tugged off his woolen hat. She checked his ears. Blood wasn't coming out. She parted his messy hair in sections and looked for injuries. Where did the rock hit you? On the face? But I was fine till I looked up just now. Everything's spinning. The rawness in his voice sent shivers down Ellen's back. Tightening her jaw, she scooted closer to Zarwin. Still, hold still. She spread her fingers over his head. His scalp felt boggy, probably bruised in many places. Zarwin squirmed and whimpered. He could be recklessly brave against an external threat, but was still terrified when his body failed. His jerking breaths made her chest squeeze. But the dizziness had started when he looked up, not when the rock had struck him. She was examining him the wrong way. Alwyn brushed back his bangs. Sal, look at me. He obeyed. In the moonlight, his gray pupils always beat back and forth to the same corner of his eyes, and Alwyn froze. This was vertigo. She had seen Miriam treat this before by moving the patient into certain positions. But what positions again? Is it real bad? Zelen whispered. Did I crack my skull? Alwyn shook her head. Fire burdened her throat as she struggled to remember the treatment. Hold on, I've seen this before. She tried not to squeeze his head as the rowing mercenaries stared. The memory of Miriam's smile and the movements to treat this condition glimmered in the recesses of her mind. Before she could act, Edward shouted for Toby to check on Ransley downstairs. Toby rose from behind several oarsmen. He started for the stairwell but skidded to a stop, mouth hanging open when he saw Alwyn and Zarwin. She was kneeling and holding the teen's head. Toby, go help someone else! Zarwin cried. Alwyn's got me! Toby's gaze locked on with Alwyn's and his frown faded. Her eyes blurred as he turned to hobble down the stairs. Both Toby and Zarwin had faith in her. Too much faith. Zell, she said, I'm going to lie you down on one side. After a bit, I'll get you up and make you lie on the other side. All right? One corner of his mouth jerked upward. How is that going to help? But I'll do it. After a moment, did we skip something? After a moment, she rubbed his shoulder. I'll move you to the other side now. She pulled him up. He was ridiculously heavy for how slender he looked. She laid him on the other side, trying not to drop him in a heap. Wrinkles over his eyelid faded. You still mad at me for the recorder, whispered. Alwyn stiffened. Of course she was still upset. Even as she and Zarwin had nearly died. Even holding on to that grudge now felt silly and meaningless. Alwyn nibbled on her lip to hold herself together. Zhaoran kept his eyes closed. Because if something happens to me, I guess I should say I'm sorry for upsetting you. His face went in and out of focus. He'll be fine, Alwyn said softly. She hoped so. She and Zhaoran had their differences, but he had taken Toby's order to keep her safe seriously, while she had had fantasies of him drowning. It wasn't right. She still had a decision to make, to forgive him or not for throwing away Alfred's recorder. Alwyn had to let go. She blew out her bitterness in a puff of air, and the burden within lightened for a moment before the sadness ascended again. She rubbed her eyes and watched Zhaoran to sleep. It seemed like forgiveness was a path to undertake, not a sappy decision to make once and forget about. Maybe one day this moment would bring her peace. So in analyzing the scene, Alwyn's character arc progressed from resentment to forgiveness for Zhaoran. And I would also add that it's one step in an overarching arc for her to redeem herself in her own eyes as a failed healer's apprentice, because given a new environment and people who didn't know that she had made all these mistakes, she was pushed to try again, and then she actually succeeded in helping many people. So by the end of the series, she was quite confident again as a healer. And Zhaoran's arc in the scene is from disregard of Alwyn's grief to being apologetic. The medical treatment scene was a pivotal moment in the relationship from antagonistic to allies, and I thought that was why this was quite necessary to include it. Externally, Zhaoran gets treated, so for the rest of the book, he was fine, no more vertigo. The ailment, for anyone curious, is benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, and this is something that medicine practitioners are aware of, and the treatment is the Samot maneuver that Alwyn administered. As for weaving medicine into our scenes, I got some help also from StoryGrid, and this is used with Tim's permission. Thanks, Tim. The concept of JITE and MRE, which sounds exactly like medical acronyms. So JITE is just-in-time exposition. Only tell the reader what they need to know right when they need to know it, not before. So nowhere in Healer's Blade did I tell the reader that Alwyn knows the treatment for vertigo, only that she was a healer with some experience, so that when the occasion arose for her to treat vertigo, it was not a surprise that she knew how to do it. As for minimum relevant exposition, MRE, that is to tell the reader only the minimum of what they need to know right then, and only what is absolutely necessary and relevant. This is very connected with info dumping. So like how I could have written the scene, I guess not as well, would be to dump all the treatment step by step of for BPPV, and then have Alwyn do them right after me listing out the steps, right? So then I only sprinkled in what was necessary for the reader to understand the scene as Alwyn was doing the treatment. So on this table, I broke down the symptoms of BPPV as well as a treatment, which I would sprinkled into my scene. Now we switch gears to the last parts of this talk, which is pitfalls in writing stories with medical content. Pitfall number 1 is medical jargon, which we mentioned previously. That is losing readers by using words he or she cannot understand. And possible solutions to this can be quite simple. One-line description of, basically the definition of this jargon slipped in the first time it is used. So in my book, I have something called a soporific sponge. It's a sponge that's infused with sedative herbs, and it's activated when you dip it in hot water. So I would say like Alwyn picked up the soporific sponge, which is used to sedate patients, and then I moved on with the rest of the story. The other one, which I see a lot in war movies, because my dad likes to watch it, and when he watches it, the whole house is, they hear about it. So newbie character learns from a pro, like the new recruit to the army is shown by the war daddy, the ropes, and the who is who. And I think this is a technique that these films use a lot, because the setting of violence and war is very different from most of our experiences on day-to-day life. So kind of an extended scene of the newbie character being introduced to this new world is necessary before the rest of the action can take place. And finally, a glossary, which is optional and also never to be used in isolation. Definitely you will anger your readers if you don't explain your jargon at all in your book and you just rely on a glossary at the end to explain. Nobody is going to enjoy flipping back and forth to that glossary. So do not use a glossary in isolation. The opposite of, throwing in jargon is info dumping. That's another way to lose readers. They want a story and not a textbook. So curb your enthusiasm. That's more like talking to myself because I like to write into too many symptoms sometimes. Thankfully, all the possible solutions from the previous slide, so such as the newbie character learns from pro, etc., also works to spread out the info dumping in a book. So say the two characters, one is a elderly mage, the other one is an apprentice, they're interacting in a scene, then you can break up the information about your world in the dialogue and in the action beats. Now, pitfall number 3 is subtle, but I fell for it big time. It's assuming that the reader knows what you know. So impossible medical situations, which you know are possible, but few other people do. So Healer's Blade is actually the second edition of my debut novel. The first edition was called Forbidden Ties, and it had a lot of issues. Ending on a cliffhanger is one of them, but something else was that I had a character hang down upside down for 16 hours, and then he saved himself, and he was fine for like the rest of the book. And to me, in medicine, I was like, yeah, this is totally okay. He's young, fit, and healthy. He's going to just go on with his life. But then the reviews came in and people were like, this is impossible. Like they're giving me bad reviews from just finding this whole situation unbelievable. So I republished my book, Healer's Blade. I included a lengthy medical note. I made a blog post about why this was possible. And by the way, that blog post is the second, if not the most popular blog post I've ever written, which makes me a bit worried about society because why are all these people Googling about how long one could survive upside down? But hey, the information is out there. And another way to prevent yourself from falling into this pitfall is to recruit beta readers. As broad range as you can from different occupations, from different parts of the world, from different age groups, because they will catch the parts that you were blind to, that you thought it was general knowledge, but is actually not general knowledge. They also talked about including medical note and adding a blog post to your website. These are also ways to avoid pitfall number 3. I'm happy to say that ever since I republished my debut as Healer's Blade, I've never had another person complain about this is impossible, that he survives upside down. Now, common medical mistakes. This is what I'll leave you guys with. Mistake number 1, my personal pet peeve are wounds that last, but lack lasting consequences. So a character can react with pain and shock to the initial injury. In fact, I think everybody's pretty good at that. But in the next moment, he, say, pulls himself out of the ocean and up the ship's side because he can't die, right? This is actually a scene I found in one of the fantasy novels I've read. The main male character gets stabbed on the hand, falls into the ocean, somehow climbs up and then keeps fighting. Like there's no hypothermia, I can still fight with the hand, okay? And there's no prior world building to explain his supernatural recovery. Normal wound healing is not very spectacular. In a relatively healthy human, up to 3 days of inflammation, swelling, heat, and pain, which I think many people are familiar with. What's interesting also is that while this inflammation is happening, all the inflammatory cells that are in the vicinity are also secreting factors that help the tissue repair and also scab formation to occur. So there's an overlap between inflammation phase and the tissue repair phase for the first couple of days. As we get into weeks and months, new skin forms, the scar begins to strengthen, and the scar remodels and fades. This process goes on for a long time, and sometimes the scar actually never goes away. And what this natural wound healing means for a story is that light activity, such as walking and basic chores, might be okay after 3 to 5 days if the bleeding has stopped and infection has not set in. Strenuous activity or combat should not happen until at least 10 to 14 days for moderate wounds, and again, if it's well cared for. Several weeks have to take place before if the person had deep muscle or abdominal injuries. Of course, in speculative fiction, you can break these rules of normal wound healing. Build your world, but introduce your character's deviation from the norm before they get injured. Mistake number 2 is being immune to the environment. So characters that fall into the ocean in the winter get out and continue growing. This is another thing I read in another fantasy book. In reality, the body is fragile. It's susceptible to dehydration. heat stroke, and hypothermia. Without water, most people would not survive after 3 days, and without food, about 3 weeks. Heat stroke occurs above a core body temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, and that manifests as confusion, collapse, and finally death. Hypothermia begins below a core body temperature of only 35, and that manifests as shivering, slow thinking, and then unconsciousness. So take advantage of these vulnerabilities of the human body. Make weather, hunger, and thirst matter. It adds realism and raises the stakes. More medical mistakes to avoid. This is from Dr. Natalie Dale, who is a former neurologist turned writer and medical story consultant. She has a blog post that I will include in this presentation as a link. So she says one of the mistakes to avoid is a character that passes out from blood loss, but then wakes up ready to fight. Why this is wrong is because by the time someone faints from blood loss, they cannot just wake up fine. They will need medical intervention before they can have any sort of recovery. The possible fixes of that is to give the character immediate medical attention, such as surgery, blood products, or pressors. And pressors are drugs that constrict blood vessels so that blood is forced back to the heart. And if immediate medical attention is not possible, consider having the character faint from pain or the sight of blood instead of true blood loss. The second medical mistake to avoid is the harmless head injury. So a character is knocked unconscious, but wakes up with just a mild headache. Now I see this like everywhere, right? In fiction, in novel, and movies, and TV series. I was actually guilty of it at some time in my first draft. I fixed it, but it's very like convenient to have a character just be kind of out of commission for a couple of hours, and then the side characters can do something or the villain does something, but it's not realistic. Why it's wrong is that somebody who loses consciousness from head trauma has really been knocked hard. So they will have concussion symptoms and bleeding within the skull. If they're unconscious for 60 and or bleeding within the skull, not always, but sometimes. If they're unconscious from 30 minutes to 6 hours, they'll wake up with severe concussion symptoms or have the bleeding within the skull. That would require hospitalization and intense rehab for weeks to months afterwards. So a character should not wake up in that dungeon and be like, oh, that was inconvenient, and just take off again. And if they're unconscious for more than 6 hours in real life, that often requires an internal intensive care unit, and many of them don't survive. The possible fixes of this, it's not that like broad. You can really just shorten the duration of unconsciousness to less than 30 minutes and include concussion symptoms after the character wakes up, or restructure the scene and have them get sedated instead. All right, so we're already at the end of my talk. I'll leave you the list of resources. So Cleveland Clinic's Health Library, WebMD, Mayo Clinic, these are all more, I would say, tailored towards the general public. Medscape is tailored towards medical professionals, but it is free. And sometimes you want the medical lingo in your books, right? So Medscape is a really good place to look up information as well. This is Dr. Natalie Dale's blog and a book that she also published. And also StoryGrid by Tim Grahl. He has excellent YouTube videos on writing. I really enjoy watching his videos. A special thanks to my friends, Heidi Scary, Mary Meekham, and Linda Ling for sharing their books and advice. Authors Patrick Johns Piper, who I think is in the audience, Katsia Levante, and the authors of Indie Fantasy Addicts, a Facebook group, for submitting questions, helping me kind of structure this talk. And of course, the Quebec Writers Federation for having me. So thank you very much for your attention. The Thief's Keeper, which is my series prequel, is free. It's a full audiobook on my YouTube channel. This talk will also be made available on my YouTube channel. And the ebook of this prequel is available for my newsletter subscribers. The challenge for you is, can you diagnose Alan's mysterious illness before you reach my author's note? I think about a third of my beta readers were able to do that. And you can sign up at kyrieWang.com or follow me on socials.
Great.
So thank you very much. Sorry?
Thanks so much, Kyrie, for that
Yeah,
presentation.
you're welcome.
And for the challenge. Yeah, it's so interesting to view medicine as this entry point for creating worlds and stories and how it intersects with so many aspects of society in our lives.
Yeah.
Kyrie has very kindly offered to share her slides with you all after the presentation. So you don't have to worry about missing any of the information. We'll send you those slides and you can refer back to them if you're looking for some of the information. Now, with that said, it's time for questions. Let's see if we have any in the chat. I don't see any. So feel free to either unmute yourself and ask your question aloud, or you can write it in the chat.
Yeah, hello. I do have
Yes,
a
hi.
question or a comment. I have a pet peeve about somebody jabbing somebody in the neck with a needle and they immediately keel over, sedated or unconscious. We see it on TV. I read it. I'm an author and also a copy editor, and I see it a lot. And I mean, who injects? You're a doctor. Do you inject people in the neck? That really bothers me to see, if they jab in the neck and the person immediately collapses sedated, and I'm like, no, you can't. I mean,
Well,
is that only me, or I mean, is that really a thing?
Well, it depends on then the context of the story, right? Is it a more fantasy, like speculative fiction, or is it more, based on real life? The ones that you're
more real life.
Yeah. So
I mean, like, in the soap operas and movies and contemporary fiction novels. I mean, I don't know. I seem to notice it a lot. And it always bothers me because I'm thinking, I mean, I'm not a doctor or anything, but I have a little bit of first aid and veterinary training. I mean, I know how to give an injection. And so, I mean, am I the only person bothered by it?
So I'll be honest, I have not seen real patients as medical school, because in pathology we get the specimen, but not the actual patient. But I'm thinking a way this could be possible is the blowguns. And it's a neurotoxin, I think, from poisonous dart frogs.
Yeah, or the blow.
Now this has to be now.
Fish.
Do your research, because I'm not a poisonous dart frog expert, but I do think there is a technique where you could coat the needle or the blowgun projectile, so that as it goes, it could cause some serious damage, including full body paralysis. Yeah. So, but then this will have to be well foreshadowed in the story that you're reading. Like, somebody has access to blowgun or some neurotoxin.
No, but I mean, I'm talking about contemporary fiction where somebody pulls the syringe out of their pocket and jabs it into the victim's neck, and they keel over immediately, asleep or unconscious or whatever. It really bothers me, and I just wonder if I'm the only person who notices this or then is bothered by it, because in a real world setting, it just seems so like impossible.
Too convenient, right? Yeah, too convenient. I'll have to do research on that to give you a full answer about how plausible it is. But if you have a copy editor,
I think you could if you could get.
Yeah.
I think you could if you could get an induction agent like sodium pentothal into the jugular.
But they don't, like on it in a movie or something. It's just like jab it into the neck and there you go.
It's a little sketch, I would think.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just wondering if I'm the only person who's bothered by it, because every time I see it, I think, oh, come on, nobody injects it. That doesn't work.
Donna, I see in the chat we have a few people who are agreeing with you. Piper says, I've read so many books with that exact situation that Donna explained. I always question how plausible that really is. And Raven says it's overused.
Oh, good.
So you're not alone.
Okay. Thanks.
Dominic, I see that you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Great discussion. Appreciate it. Just a comment about the cold water. If you've ever experienced hypothermia in Quebec water, you know how this debilitating it is. So I hate scenes when you see people just get out, they fall into icy water, and 2 minutes later and their life is good. It just doesn't work that way.
No.
I have a question regarding, you sort of made a comment about explaining or not explaining when you put certain terminology. There's a lot of, it's not medical per se, but in the stuff I'm writing, it has certain contexts. I hate over explaining stuff. I have this constant discussion with a few fellow writers about, I'll use a term or I'll use a situation where it's not necessarily critical to the story, but if the reader really wants to understand what's happening, they should do a little bit of research. So I argue that readers should do research. But I'm just wondering, at which point do you think you're, as a writer, you're over-explaining or under-explaining? Is there, I know there's not a rule of thumb, perhaps, but in your experience, at which point have you gone too far over-explained, or maybe is something that really should be critical that it is explained in more detail?
Yeah, so that really depends on the story that you're writing. If like pretend you take away the information that you think it's a bit extraneous, if you delete that information, can your target audience still read the story and have an understanding? Certainly people who are more interested in the part of, well, the technology, say, that you're trying to describe, they can do research. But I would say include the minimum that a typical reader would need to know in order to understand the story, to sympathize with your characters and understand why the ending is what it is. And again, the beta readers are going to be very helpful. Like even 3, it'll give you, like, if 2 of them don't complain and 1 of them complain, well, maybe get a few more beta readers to see where this dynamic goes.
Right.
But if all of them are totally confused, then you probably should include more exposition.
Okay, great. Thank you. Perfect.
You're welcome.
I have a comment in the chat, which I'll read aloud from Josette. People in books or movies always have big illnesses. Nobody ever gets a simple cold. Also, nobody talks about the frustration of illness or injury. Do we have any further questions? I think that's a sign that, Kyrie, your presentation was very comprehensive.
Well, I hope
and
so.
explained things in great detail.
If you enjoyed this talk, it'll be up on YouTube. Feel free to share it with a friend.
All right, great. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. And Kyrie, thanks so much again for giving this presentation. It was a real pleasure going through it. All righty. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye.